Hey everyone, this is Mr. Xiao, and we are looking at our lecture video number one for Europe and the Weimar Republic. As you are going through these slides, make sure you complete the activities on your Nearpod. And this is actually going to cover from the beginning of our um, slides to slide 33. And let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to be talking about the democracy first. The fragility, meaning the weakness or the how how easily it is to lose the democracy. So democracy is becoming rather than being. It can it can easily be lost, but never is fully won. Its essence is internal struggle, and this is quoted by William H. Hastie. And so, what does this mean? And so, break up this quote. There's three sentences in it, and you could probably just focus on one. Why can democracy be easily lost? Think about that, and think about also democracy is becoming. Okay, this idea of becoming. How do we become? Right? How do we become this democratic, this fair government that we assume that everybody has a say? All right, so take some time and think about this. You can pause the video now and writing your thoughts about what democracy is becoming and why is this essence something we struggle with? What are we? Why do we actually have to fight for this? So our essential question is that we're going to be looking at three things. We're going to be talking about something called the Weimar Republic, and that's going to be part of our first lecture. So, what is the Weimar Republic, and how did its stability affect the path to war? And so you're probably like, who's the Weimar Republic? It's actually very essential that you understand what the Weimar was and how it actually gave rise to someone very, very important to World War II. And so, lecture number two is going to talk about economy, politics, and a little bit of the leadership. Okay, and then how did the world leaders change the politics of the world in the 1930s? And we're going to be looking at why would these leaders choose a path to war, and this idea of fascism for our third lecture. Okay. All right. So before World War II, okay, we were talking about a couple of different countries. First, we were talking about Russia, and Russia was mainly communism. Okay, it was communistic. It was a totalitarian state, and they kind of kicked out Nicholas, and then it became a communist state. In Germany, they had uh, Kaiser Wilhelm, who actually was in charge for the First World War. But after they lost really poorly and really badly after World War One, they got rid of this guy. His name was Kaiser Wilhelm, and they started looking to democratic options such as a republic. And so this is kind of the state of what Germany and Russia were going through. They were very much changing in their politics and their government. And so Germany, there was actually a great discontent. Okay, and so we call this the bubbling cauldron. And if you've ever had bubbling soup or a steaming bowl of like sundibu, okay, and sundibu is actually Korean hot pot. And so if you kind of understand how that it kind of boils and kind of you feel this heat, but you don't know exactly where it's coming from or how it's cooking that egg in the center. So when we look at this bubbling cauldron effect, what is this bubbling cauldron? So let's go ahead and read this quote. Even the capital of our new Germany Republic was like a bubbling cauldron. So now Germany has a new government. You could not see who was heating the cauldron. You can merely see it merely bubbling, and you could feel the heat increasing. There were speakers on every street corner and songs of hatred everywhere. Everywhere was hidden the Jews, the captains, the gentry, the communists, the military, the landlords and workers, the unemployed, politicians, the department stores, and again, the Jews. And so you could see that there was a lot of discontent under the surface, even though so many new things were coming, so many um, effects were kind of changing their world. And think about how this is related to our world. With the invention of the internet, so many things have changed. Okay, and there's also this new platform for everybody to voice their discontent. The whole idea of communication was to bring people together, but has it? Right? So, what exactly is that bubbling cauldron? Do we see it today? All right, so we're going to be looking at Gross's quote. And Gross was actually somebody that actually was around during that time and really kind of noticed all these discontents that was happening within Europe, especially Germany. And so think about recent news, modern events, social media. Give us a sense that the cauldron is still bubbling. Is still this bubbling feeling? Is there's this like grumbling underneath? Is there these whispers? Oh man, I don't like this guy. Like, is there like all of these that we see today? Okay, and again, the internet is so chock full of some of these examples. Okay, or is it? Is it maybe helping us, kind of vent or even at least, speak about our discontent or our unhappiness? Is it helping? So think about that. Why or why not? In other words, do we see evidence of what Gross is describing in this quote today, especially about different groups and people? So go ahead and answer that. And there's been so much stuff online. Just kind of search. What are you thinking about Gross's quote, and how does it relate to our today? You could go ahead and stop the video now and go ahead and write your answers. All right, so the bubbling cauldron. Here's another example of the bubbling cauldron, and this is what was happening in the Roaring Twenties. And the twenties was the period of time that everybody was partying and everybody was having a great time. Everybody was buying new items and new things. Okay, and think about as you watch this, look for evidence of either positive or negative bubbling of the cauldron. Okay, and just think about like how things are happening in this trailer and think about Great Gatsby because Gatsby puts on a really nice show, but underneath the surface what's really going on? So where is that bubbly culture? What do we see it where do we see it in this trailer? Okay. So the bubbling cauldron, or what was heating up in that trailer. Okay, so think about this bubbling cauldron of intense intensity, anger. Where was that coming from, and where do you see that in the Roaring Twenties, and why? All right, you could go ahead and stop the video here too, and complete this activity. All right, so Germany after World War One, okay, is actually essentially what we're talking about in the Weimar Republic, and so the 1920s is the setting of the scene and the time that period that we're talking about. As you notice over on the left side, Europe and German Empire was actually huge, and then as 1923 came along, it lost portions of its territory, and you can see that some of its territory is even actually in Poland now, which is kind of odd. And so Austria-Hungary was kind of broken up into pieces, and you can see that so many different countries kind of now exist instead of Austria-Hungary. And so the important part of this is what's going on here, and how do you think you would feel if you lived in one of these areas? Would you be okay? Hey, now you're Czechoslovakian. It's like what? I can't even say that. Where's Czech? What? Wait, we're in Czechoslovakia now. So think about like all this different ideas of what happened with this change of the map. And so describe the changes of the borders in 1914, 1923, as I just did, and explain who would be the most upset with these changes. Why would you like think there would be like kind of anger or again that bubbly cauldron happening within these borders? And it's really kind of odd just kind of looking at this, but it looks like a completely different Europe, doesn't it? So you can stop the video now and think about the changes that were made. And here's the map again. All right, so instability after World War One. This is also on page 364 to 370 if you want to read about it. But during this time, new democracies were happening. So a lot of these countries that actually got independence all of a sudden, and you got to remember, Austria-Hungary was a monarchy where they actually had a king. His name was Kaiser Wilhelm, and the Kaiser was disposed, and then now they're not. They're no longer a democracy, and so they're no longer a monarchy. And Germany becomes a democracy, and so does Austria-Hungary, I believe. And Austria-Hungary is now two separate places, and they also have very different types of governments. And so the fall of these kingdoms lead to okay, now we have to govern ourselves. Now we get to choose. Now we get to actually have a, like representative democracy, which we've never done before. What? So they have never done something like this before, and so some of these democracies kind of form into coalition governments, meaning that they actually have governments where it's actually not just one country but several countries, which is kind of odd. And this creates a huge instability because people are still like trying to figure out, wait, how does this work again? And so Germany's new republic becomes, is it stable though? Okay, and that's actually the big question. Okay, so that's what's called the Weimar Republic. And then the Weimar Republic is the German democratic government that was formed in 1919. This is actually a precursor to what actually happens later. So Germany, you remember, kind of started World War II, and there was actually a big reason for that because there was somebody that actually kind of led that. But during that time, the government of Germany was blamed for everything that happened in World War One. Like even though they didn't start it, but they kind of did, but they didn't really start it. And so the Treaty of Versailles was really humiliating. It really kind of made them like pay a lot of money. Hey, you got to pay this bill, and they had no democratic tradition, so they were starting from scratch. And so they created a blend of presidential and parliament systems, and there was just so many political parties that nobody really understood how or why or who to listen to. Okay, and so and and they kind of started allowing people to kind of take part in this democratic tradition where they didn't really have very much tradition. Okay, and so Germany and France also signed a kind of no fighting kind of like a peace treaty, but there was no way to enforce it. So like Germany was still really hated by France, and there was no way to kind of keep Germany from being kind of like kind of messed up by France, but they didn't. So imagine yourself as a German citizen, and then all these new things happen. Okay, how would you feel about your government politically? Like, ooh, yay! Now you get to vote. What's voting? We never did that before. And so think about all these things that happened in the Weimar Republic. You could go ahead and stop the video now and explain. Okay, so the Weimar Republic actually set up its own constitution. And as you read, pay attention to what are the goals of the republic. What aspects of a democracy are present, and where does it fall short? Explain. You don't really actually learn anything until you try and fail. And this is kind of one of the reasons why the Weimar Republic completely failed. Because they had to try new things and they didn't actually have any tradition. And before it was under like one person, which was the Kaiser, the king, and now they actually had parties and groups, and there were so many voices to listen to. It was very difficult for them. So taking a look at their constitution, do you think their constitution was helpful in this aspect? Okay, did they actually embraced democracy and was allowed to kind of have protect everybody's rights. Okay, so as you read this document, look for these things. Okay, what was their goals? What type of democracy did it represent, or like how did it kind of help this idea of democracy, and what were the problems? Because there was definitely problems in this constitution. Okay, so looking at our U.S. Constitution, okay, there's a very specific things that we're looking at. Okay, free exercise of speech, press, and peacefully assemble, and to petition, and also to address the government. Okay, so those are just kind of things that we see in what we're saying. Okay, and under the Weimar Constitution, we see that. Okay, injustice for peace at home and abroad to promote social progress and have the established following constitution. So that's just kind of the beginning. Still a little bit vague, but does it tell us anything specific? Are there anything that actually is similar to the U.S. Constitution and the Weimar Constitution? Are they more similar or are they more different? Right? Go ahead and answer that poll. Okay, so there's several several little articles in it, but we're just going to look at the most important. Okay, so the idea of invulnerable means cannot be destroyed. And so think about some of the things that we see here. The home, like Article 115, the home of every Germany is the sanctuary and cannot be destroyed or taken away. Exceptions are permitted only by authority of law. Wait a minute. So think about that. What does that actually mean? Okay. And so communication, are there freedom of communication? Well, just kind of look at that very carefully. So, are there any problems for these articles? Is anything unfair to German citizens? And you wonder why, the idea of the Nazi Party and even Hitler, okay, came into the rise of this, right? See, look at what they're really saying in this constitution. So the Weimar Constitution document also goes on to talk about criminal law, a right to petition. He can't censor anybody. Okay, within the limits of general laws to express opinion freely by word and writing, in print, in picture, or another way. Censorship is forbidden. And so, do you think the Weimar's freedoms and the Constitution would be kept with the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party? And so Hitler and the Nazi Party came very, very shortly after this. And in the 1930s, okay, this is where Hitler actually takes power, only about 10 years after the establishment of the Weimar Constitution. So we'll kind of look at that in a little bit, okay? And there is no state church, okay? So meaning that the government doesn't take any position when it comes to religion. And so we're religious and that the group will face the most direct challenges to their freedoms in violation of the Weimar Constitution. And kind of look at those words again, because if there isn't a state church, then who decides what churches or what religions are acceptable? And that's going to be a tough one, right? All right. And so in the 1920s, the Weimar Republic faced a huge crisis. and that actually is the crisis of economics. They owed so much money to Europe because of the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles literally made Germany pay for all the damages, and this is millions and billions of dollars, and this caused a huge crisis in inflation. Inflation means that prices went up, but the money that they had didn't wasn't really worth that much. So that was actually a huge problem. So the value of German currency falls dramatically, and just understanding just how much these little printed notes were worth, it was actually almost 4 trillion marks in 1923. 4 trillion. That's actually 4 trillion of these little papers, only equaled one U.S. dollar in Germany, and that's really crazy. Imagine having to um, walk around with like bucketfuls or like wheelbarrows full of money because that's the only way you could buy things because you needed so much of this money. And so like the German mark became so useless that kids were flying kites, making dresses, and even burning it for like warmth because there was just so much of it. And so there was actually an attempt to stabilize it, and so American banks lent Germans more money. They were already like kind of like lending them money, but now the Germans actually were almost dependent on American like loans in order for them to even have like any kind of stability. And so this is called the Dolls Act. It was actually passed to kind of help the Germans so that their economy doesn't completely fail. And so, as we look at this, see these kids, what are they doing? Those, by the way, are again German marks. Again, German marks. What are they doing with it? Right? Crazy, right? And so, what do you observe in the primary source of images of money during the Weimar Republic? Where you're surprised by some of the uses of the money you saw. So think about what they did with the German marks, and this was a huge crisis, having to like haul around these stacks of paper, which really wasn't worth that much, right? Okay, you can go ahead and stop the video now and answer this question. And go ahead and enter the poll as well. Is there any scenario in which you would be willing to burn money? Hmm. Okay, so this is George Gross again, and one of the primary sources of the war in Germany is to kind of talk about what was happening with this money. So lingering at the shop when there was a luxury because shopping had to be done immediately. Even an additional minute meant an increase in price. One had to buy quickly because a rabbit, for example, might cost 2 million marks more by the time it took to walk to the store. A few million marks meant nothing, really. It was just that it meant more lugging. The packages of money needed to buy the smallest item had long since become too heavy for trouser pockets. They weighed many pounds. People had to start carting the money around in wagons, knapsacks. I use a knapsack, right? So Gauss is actually in Germany. He was a German who experienced this. And so, what was frustrating about with the government if prices rose? Okay, and this is actually something that happened in the world of Germany. So, and how would you feel about this? So, would you be frustrated? Would you be angry, or would you, well, at least we can buy stuff, right? So, think about that question. Okay, and this is where we're going to stop. So our next lecture is going to be coming up, talking about what's next, and that is the 1930s. Okay, so Weimar Republic was established in the 1920s, and then the 30s comes. Okay, and guess what happens then? All right, thank you for watching this lecture. I will see you in the next one.